gardens flow. Blessed be your name. Blessed be your name. When I'm found in the desert place, though I walk through the wilderness, blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed be your name. When the sun's shining down on me, when the world's all as we should be, blessed be your name. Let us sing blessed. Blessed be your name. On the road marked with suffering, though there's pain in the offering, blessed be your name. Every blessing you pour out, I'll turn back to praise. When the darkness closes in, Lord, still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, oh, blessed be your name. Let's sing. You give and take away. You give and take away. My heart will choose to say, oh, blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Blessed, oh blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name.
Thank you for the cross, Lord. Thank you for the price you paid, bearing all my sin and shame. In love you came and gave amazing grace. Thank you for this love, Lord. Thank you for the nail-pierced hands. Wash me in your cleansing flow. Now all I know, your forgiveness and embrace. Worthy is the Lamb seated on the throne. Crown you now with many crowns. You reign victorious. High and lifted up, Jesus, Son of God, the darling of heaven, crucified. Worthy is the罪和羞愧，使我完全吃下奇妙恩典。感谢你无比的爱，感谢你的恩深重，宝血洗净我无悔，使我了解。你完全把我赦免，神羔羊配得，坐在宝座上，头戴着尊贵冠冕，你作王到永远。充赞美，耶稣神儿子，从天降下被钉十架，神羔羊配得，神羔羊配得。Worthy is the Lamb, seated on the throne. Crown you now with many crowns, you reign victorious. High and lifted up, Jesus, Son of God, the darling of heaven, crucified. Worthy is the Lamb, worthy is the Lamb, worthy is the Lamb.
Good morning, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to our Sunday service. I will be teaching the lesson again this morning. Last week we learned about what a good God we have as seen through the life of David. David, our hero, man after God's own heart, lied to the high priest, ate the sacred bread he was not supposed to eat. And when David fled to Nob, the city of priests, Saul would later arrive and kill all the priests in that city except for one who escaped. Such mistakes and weaknesses are enough to disqualify someone from becoming the king of a nation, much less to be a hero of the Bible. Because when we hear of such titles, we have this image of a person who does not fall like the rest of us. Yet God has never been shy to show that His heroes are men and women of strengths and weaknesses just like the rest of us. And God was never ashamed to be called their God. We will continue to learn from the life of David this week. The title of the sermon this morning is God Knows What He is Doing. We will read from 1 Samuel chapter 22, verse 1 to 3. David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam. When his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. All those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their leader. About 400 men were with him. From there, David went to Mizpah in Moab and said to the king of Moab, "Would you let my father and my mother come and stay with you until I learn what God will do for me?" As we learned last week, perhaps for the first time in his life, David felt lost. He was no longer sure what God was willing to do with him or for him. His statement to the king of Moab shows he could not understand why God was allowing these things to happen to him, since he had done right by God. Times of difficulties and challenges can make us doubt God. It is a horrible feeling to believe that God no longer fights for you. Brothers and sisters, we must always strive to be a church that seeks God first, in good times and in bad. For David, things didn't seem to be getting better. He was alone. He needed companions. And the people who came to him were people who came with all kinds of problems. The ones who came to him, he needed an army, but the ones who came to him were people with issues. People who were distressed, in debt, and discontented. As if David did not already have enough problems on his own. So David did what he always did best in his life. He poured out his heart to God. It is such a privilege for us to be able to study the life of David. Not just do we get to read about what was happening, like in this case, Saul was chasing David to kill him. We also have the privilege to read about what was going on inside David as he was going through this ordeal. And this is where David's Psalms come in very handy. And through David's Psalms, we see that regardless of what was happening, if there was one thing that he never stopped doing, was praying. And that's our first point this morning. Never, ever stop praying. In Psalm 5, from verse 1, it reads, and this is David's prayer, "O Lord, hear me as I pray. Pay attention to my groaning. Listen to my cry for help, my King and my God. For I pray to no one but you. Listen to my voice in the morning, Lord. Each morning I bring my requests to you and wait expectantly." If we were to study David's prayer, look at the words that David was pouring out to God. 4 times he asked God to hear him out. Hear me. Pay attention to my groaning. Groaning is an indication that he's in some kind of pain. Listen to my cry for help. And then again, listen to my voice. And we got an idea how often he was praying, because he says here, each morning I bring my requests to you and I wait expectantly. So this is not the first time David was crying out to God to save him from Saul. It says that he does this every single morning, and every time he comes to God, he prays. He would wait, expecting God to answer his prayers. But each time they seem to go unanswered. So we get the idea that David was feeling like God is not listening to him. So he lets out groans of pain in his prayer, and he pleads with God, hear me, listen. Why are you not listening to my prayer? So he cries out to God every single morning. His Psalms can really teach us how to pray. He uses all the words that he knows to pour out his heart to God. It's like when someone says, I'm in pain. we don't exactly know what that means. Is this person in physical pain, emotional pain, or spiritual pain, or even how much pain there is? David expresses his pain in as many different ways as he could, in as many different words as he could. And I think that's what makes David so good at connecting with God. In another psalm, in Psalm 59, verse 1, he says, "Rescue me from my enemies, O God. Protect me from those who have come to destroy me. Rescue me from these criminals. Save me from these murderers." That was how David started his prayer. I mean, look at his words. God, rescue me. Protect me. Rescue me. Save me. Out of the overflow of his heart, his mouth pours out these words. You can sense David's desperation. And he was very specific about whom he was praying about. I mean, he told God that you got to save me from these enemies of mine, from those who wants to destroy me, these murderers. He was very specific about his desperate cry. It was not just a simple, help me, God, and that's it. I think we can learn from David that we could all put a little bit more effort into asking God more elaborately, more specifically, what we want God to help us in. In fact, I think we could all be doing a little better in expressing our pain and our needs, our struggle to the ones who are close to us. Because it is amazing how little many of us say when we are struggling or when we're going through challenging times, even to the ones who are very close to us. Someone could be asking us, how are you doing? And we say, okay, could be better. What is this mysterious answer? Sometimes we say, don't know, not sure, and we just stop there. We make no attempt to connect deeper with ourselves, to give better answers to our friends. If we were to sit for exams and that's our answer, we will fail every exam that we sit for. Some of us perhaps would say a little bit more like, I'm struggling with my quiet time. Okay, that's a great start. But what are we talking about here? Like, you have not been reading a Bible for how long? You have not been praying? Have you lost your faith? Have you been struggling with some sin? We've got to learn to express our struggles and our needs better. But one of the most common answers I've come across is the classic silence. Whether you're struggling or you're doing well, you say nothing to anyone. This is especially true of men. Many don't even tell their wives what's going on in their lives, whether it's spiritual, emotional, physical, or even financial. Many men subscribe to this belief that men should go through struggle silently and quietly because it is manly, is what men should do. Admitting struggle is a sign of weakness, and real men don't do that. Is that really true? Doesn't that sound ridiculous? In fact, it is this kind of lie that I think many men have bought into that have destroyed their lives. Was David a wimp for pouring out his heart vulnerably to God and even to Jonathan? He wept with his best friend. Are we more manly than David by not being open about what we go through? Have we faced a giant and killed a giant like David? Have we led many men into battles and won? If anything, I think we can learn a lot from David. I think David understood what it meant to be a real man, and in this case, a man of God. He knew when to be ready for battle, and he also knew when to be vulnerable. Brothers, let's be men of God, not men of the world. And sisters, we all know that this doesn't just apply to men. there are many women who also struggle with being open about what's going on. Let's learn to be open and vulnerable to God and to the ones closest to us. Let's continue reading a little bit in Psalm 59 and see what else came out of David's heart in his prayer. In verse 4, it says, I have done nothing wrong, yet they prepare to attack me. Wake up! See what is happening! Help me! O Lord God of heaven's armies, the God of Israel, wake up! Punish those hostile nations. Show no mercy to wicked traitors. David pleads his innocence with God. He tells God that he has done nothing wrong, and rightly so, yet Saul was trying to kill him. As David cried out about this great injustice that he was suffering, he turned his frustration on God. He cried, Wake up, God! See what is happening! Why are you not helping me? He was literally demanding for God to respond. We can tell that his emotions got away from him a little bit over there. But that was how real David was with God. And how could he not be? I mean, look at the things that he was probably going through. He was angry. He was afraid. He was afflicted. He was very hurt. He was very betrayed. David didn't have to be macho with God. He didn't come thinking, oh, I'm going through a lot, but I gotta pray like a man of God. No, if there was anyone he could be real with, it was God. The man was in turmoil and pain. Raw emotions were overflowing out of him. If there was anything that he needed, it was calmness, courage, and comfort. Only God could provide those during such times. And isn't this how real we are supposed to be when we are praying to our Father in heaven? Because there's going to be times in our lives when we are going to have to wrestle with God in prayer over things we do not understand or feel completely powerless with. And why? Why do we wrestle? Well, for David, he wrestled with God in prayer because he refused to simply just give in to bitterness and doubt. David's story reminds me of Job in the Bible. When Job lost all of his children and then his skin broke out in painful sores, his wife looked at him and said, "Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die." And Job's response was amazing. He said to his wife, "You are being a foolish woman. Should we accept good from God and not bad?" And the Bible says that in that manner, Job did not sin. And I think David was just like Job. In spite of all the pain he was going through, he refused to just give in to bitterness and doubt. When things don't go our way, anyone can become bitter. Anyone can be in doubt. Many give up on righteousness and obedience to God when they feel like, God is not saving me from my situation or relieving me from my pain. So they feel it's justified that they leave the path of righteousness and obedience. They feel it is fair and justified to take things into their own hands, even if it's wrong. How many stop praying when they suffer some inconveniences or setbacks? How many decide that they no longer need to be obedient to God when they feel God has not answered their prayers? I don't think our situations could be worse than David's. Yet David never allowed his bitter situations or his negative feelings to drag him away from God. Let's look at how David always closes out his prayers. We go back to Psalm 5 in verse 11. David says, "But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Let them sing joyful praises forever. Spread your protection over them, that all who love your name may be filled with joy. For you bless the godly, O Lord. You surround them with your shield of love. In psalm after psalm, David would always bring himself back to surrendering to God. Even though he would start off his psalm in pain, he would pray and eventually remind himself, no, God is my refuge. He is my strength. He has not forgotten me. And then in Psalm 59, in verse 16 to 17, he says, but as for me, I will sing about your power. Each morning I will sing about joy, about your unfailing love, for you have been my refuge, a place of safety when I'm in distress. O my strength, to you I sing praises. For you, O God, are my refuge, the God who shows me unfailing love. I mean, look at how David concluded Psalm 59, the one where he so boldly and rudely called out to God to wake up. He was able to pray until he was able to sincerely say, God, you are my refuge, you are my strength. I trust in your unfailing love. From being angry, afraid, and afflicted, he prays until he remembers that God has always been his refuge, his place of safety. That God has always saved him from every dangerous situation. He was able to close with calmness, found courage and comfort in God. In many of David's psalms, we often see him crying out in distress, in anger. But the beauty of David's relationship with God is that he would always pray till he was able to close with praise and thanksgiving and surrender to God. We have to learn from David. Regardless of our challenges, the best thing to do is to bring our struggles to God. We need to learn to pour out to God honestly, openly, vulnerably, while all the time reminding ourselves that God knows best. We have to become better at praying, and I mean really praying, like David. Anyone can give up during times of difficulties and trouble. Anyone can be faithful when times are good. But it is the one who truly loves God and who believes in who He is, who will continue to wrestle it out with God during difficult times, all the while holding on to being faithful to Him. They wrestle because they refuse to believe that God would abandon those who are trying their best to be righteous. They wrestle because they refuse to accept that God would not hear their cries and pleas. At the same time, they wrestle because they refuse to give in to the temptation to sin and give up on God. Here in David's life, we get a glimpse of what it means to be a man of God's heart. And sure enough, God is faithful. We may never understand why God's timing always doesn't seem to fit with our timing, but He always comes through for His faithful ones. And that leads us to our second point, which is to never doubt God's plan. We saw early on that while David was running for his life, he could do with some good company. Unfortunately, all those who came to him were the ones with more problems. So much so that when he saw the king of Moab, he told him, I'm not even sure now what God wants to do for me. But as we saw, he never stopped praying, even though he was not getting the answer he was looking for. Just because we don't see God's answer does not mean God is doing nothing. We should never doubt God's plan. So we read what happens in 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 1. These were the men who came to David at Ziklag, while he was banished from the presence of Saul, son of Kish. They were among the warriors who helped him in battle. They were armed with bows and were able to shoot arrows or to sling stones, right-handed or left-handed. They were kinsmen of Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. And then in verse 8, Some Gadites defected to David at his stronghold in the desert. They were brave warriors, ready for battle, and able to handle the shield and spear. Their faces were the faces of lions, and they were as swift as gazelles in the mountains. And then in verse 14, these Gadites were army commanders. The least was a match for 100, and the greatest for 1,000. All the while when David thought that God had abandoned him, God was busy setting up an army of mighty men for David. What a contrast this group was from the first. Just look at their credentials. It's so impressive, able to shoot arrows, sling stones with either the left or the right hand. They were kingsmen of Saul, brave warriors, ready for battle. I don't even know what this means. Faces of lions, swift as gazelles. Least could handle 100, greatest 1,000. David himself could never pull together an army like that. Look at these guys. What does it even mean that they had faces of lions? Did it mean that they could kill someone just with their looks? These guys were brave warriors. They were already trained. They were ready for battle. They came ready to fight. When you see even the kinsmen of Saul, people who were related to Saul, going over to David, you know that only God could have done something like that. It looks like God always knew what he was doing, even when David lost his security in God. Why would God tell his children to pray to him constantly if he was not going to listen to them? Just because we don't know the plan, it does not mean that God does not have a good one for us. So brothers and sisters, never ever stop praying. Never doubt God's plan. Stay faithful all the time. You will never know what God has in store for the ones he loves. For the KL Church, God has done exactly that. Just when we thought that we would never have a building of our own, with land prices going beyond our reach, God came through with the Kwasa land for us. It looks like God always knew what he was doing. I leave you now with some reflection questions. Thank you.
The love of God is greater far than a tongue or pen can never tell. It goes beyond the highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. The guilty pair bow down with care. God gave his son to win his erring child. He reconciled and pardoned from his sin. Could we with ink the ocean fill and were the sky
judgment made, where every stalk on of a quill, and every man a scribe by trade, to write the love of God above, portray the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. Oh, love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure. The saints and angels song, the saints and angels song, the saints and angels song.
All to Jesus I surrender.